Hello and welcome to Small Game Adventures. I am Mootle, and today we're having a comprehensive look at the Magicka 2 spell casting system. So I'm going to be trying to get up some videos probably a little bit later on in the year, or maybe the month, I don't know, we'll see how we go. Maybe next month, that'd be a good idea, on Magicka 2 gameplay, but I thought it'd be really interesting to have a look at the Magicka 2 spellcasting system. So when I'm talking about spells and elements, you're going to have any idea what I'm talking about. Now, we have 8 main elements in Magicka 2, accessed by the Q, W, E, R, A, S, D, and F keys. Our first element is water, that's found on Q. W accesses life, E accesses shield, R accesses frost, A accesses electricity, S accesses death or arcane, D accesses rock, and F accesses fire. So that's probably something you want to get a bit of muscle memory in your fingers, so that when we're talking about the different elements, you can actually just hit the keys without thinking about it too much, and that's something that's very useful in gameplay, not having to look down at your keyboard when you're playing. Now, how do those elements actually relate to each other? Our first and primary element is shield. The reason I'm calling it primary element is because it will affect absolutely anything else you cast with it. So anything you cast, if you add shield to your cast, it will actually affect the spell and how it comes out. And we'll go into a detail about how it does that in a little bit later. Our secondary elements are electricity and rock. Again, these two cancel each other out. You can't cast them both at the same time, but they will affect anything else cast with them apart from shield. A rock will produce a projectile, and electricity produces an electric spray or thunderstorm of some variety. Our tertiary elements are life and death. Again, you can't cast them both together, and they're known as the beam spells, so they'll produce some sort of beam when just used with the elements underneath them on this tree. We tend to use arcane a little bit more than we do life, and you'll see why in a little bit, but it gives us a bit more damage. Now, our quaternary element is water. Water is one of our 3 sprays combined with frost and fire, but we call it a quaternary on its own because it can combine with both fire and frost to produce different elements. So obviously, finally on this tree is the quinary elements, the fire and the frost. Again, with spray mechanics, they add debuffs to anything they hit. So obviously, fire sets you on fire, frost makes you slow, and water makes you wet. Now, one of our, I guess, our sub-elements is steam. That's fire and water. We'll add that in probably the quaternary section, I guess. It's another one of the sprays, so we don't have to worry too much about it. And the other combination is ice, which is water and frost. Now, ice can be actually a direct replacement for rock. So we're going to stick it up here in this like second tier category, I don't know. So it can replace rock in any of your spells, but when used with rock, it is actually a secondary to rock. So we'll stick it in there as in second tier because that makes complete sense. Alrighty. Anyway, now that we've gone through the different elements and where they sit in that tree, we're going to make a spell tree. So here's our little caster down the bottom here. Our first and easiest spells that we're ever going to cast are the sprays. So our water, frost, and fire, and we'll add steam in underneath them. So these are our sprays. Again, they're really easy to cast. You just hit the button and go, and no thought required there. But we don't tend to use them too much because they're not very powerful. Now, our second type of spell that we can cast is our beam spell. So first of all, we'll need to use death or life. Generally death, unless you're trying to heal an ally or fighting a demon. So death normally we'll use for our beams, and then we can add on our sprays to the arcane that we're using. So we can use our sprays, the water, frost, and fire here with the steam. Now you see I'm going to combine these elements, the sprays together. I'm just going to make it a little bit easier, and I'm going to combine the arcane and life together as well, to save a little bit of space on this massive chart that we're building. So that'll be handy. All right. Our third type of spell, I guess, that we can cast is, we'll probably go with ice, I reckon. Ice will produce this little shards, so you actually get some ice shards that you'll shoot out. They can be charged up similar to a rock projectile, so the more you charge, the further it will go, and the less spread you get on your ice shards. So depending on how much damage or how much distance you want on that cast is how long you charge it up for. Now, with our ice shards, we can obviously add the sprays to those, but we can't add fire. Fire will cancel out frost. So we can't add that, but we can add water and frost. So that will actually add a wetting debuff or a cooling debuff to our shards when they hit something. So something that you can definitely use there. We can also add our life or death to these shards, and to that life and death we can then add those spray debuffs as well. Of course, we can't use steam when we're using ice because that requires fire, so that will cancel out our frost. Now, the fourth type of spell, normally offensive spell that we can use, is the electricity. Now, electricity is very fun, but has very limited use because we can't use it in conjunction with rock or water. Both of those cancel out electricity. So, electricity can be cast on its own, just in front of you if you want. It will produce this, I guess, electric spray in front of you. Or you can cast it all around yourself, which is really rather nice and can do a lot of damage pretty quickly. We can add our sprays to electricity as well. Of course, we can't add water, so it's just the frost and the fire. I highly recommend actually trying out the fire and electricity AoE spell. That can do a whole heap of damage to low tier units, and can do a lot of damage to your allies as well, but don't tell them that. We can, of course, add arcane and life to this electricity and the sprays onto that arcane and life as well. So generally, you know, if you're going to hit electricity, arcane, and maybe some fire to do some electric damage, and that chains quite well with low tier enemies. Now, the fifth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I guess it's fifth, sixth-ish, yeah, fifth, we'll call it fifth. The fifth offensive type that we're going to use is the rock. Now, rocks can be a lot of fun, and I actually really like using rock in AoE, and we'll get into a bit more about why that is in a second. But rock on its own can be charged up and launched across the map. So that's your normal right mouse button. Your self-hit, obviously that's probably a bad idea because you'll just hit yourself in the head with a rock. But your AoE will actually do an AoE around you that will actually semi-stun enemies standing near you, so that's kind of fun. We can, of course, add any of the sprays to rock to add some fire, frost, or water debuffs to that rock projectile or AoE. We can add some arcane or life damage to that rock. And some sprays onto that arcane and life if we'd like. We can also add the ice. So if we go rock and ice, we're still shooting a rock projectile, so the rock still acts like a rock, but the ice will do a bit of extra damage. Now, ice, especially in Magicka 1, ice used to do a whole bunch of damage. I don't know how that works anymore. I can't find any matrices on what elements add what damage amounts to spells, but it does change the way the rock works a little bit. So we'll add some ice damage, and your AoE looks kind of cool if you like the looks kind of thing when you use rock and ice. Now the ice, obviously we can add our sprays, water and frost, but not fire to that. And again, we can add arcane and those sprays to those ice if we want. So we can go rock, water, frost, arcane, and frost again if we want to do a whole bunch of really cool damage and make the spell look really fun. Now, our final category, the one that gets really big and makes this matrix look crazy, is the shield. Now, the shield element, again, it's our primary element, primary modifier. It'll change absolutely everything, so we pretty much have to go through everything again. So, first of all, our sprays, water, frost, and fire, and steam, we'll add them all into one category. When we add shield to these, we will actually add some sort of barrier in front of us. So a fire will basically just be a fire curtain. You have a water curtain, a frost curtain, or a steam curtain. That'll just cast right in front of you. If you use an AoE, that curtain will be exactly the same, but it will extend all the way around you, 360 degrees. So not always the most useful, but you know, just chucking down a frost curtain if you're panicking or running away from things can help you a bit. So something to keep in mind. We can add arcane to the shield, and adding arcane or life to the shield makes it really fun. We actually get mines. So mines are something you chuck down and they'll activate when people walk over them. Again, we can add our sprays, so our water, frost, fire, or steam sprays to the mines to give them a little bit of oomph when they hit to catch you on fire. Those debuffs, which is kind of fun. And the mines will actually throw you as well. So if you walk onto them, they might throw you across the map a little bit. So that's a lot of fun to play around with. The third type that we can use with shield is the ice. Now, ice shields are really quite fun. They produce almost an ice wall in front of you. Now, as a general rule, as far as like deflecting physical attacks, you're better off with a rock wall, which we'll get into in a second. But ice walls actually reflect magic damage. As in like beam spells. So if someone's trying to shoot a beam at you, especially those shamans, or an ally if they're being a horrible person, you can stick ice either in front of you or self-cast, and that will reflect the beam. So again, we can add our sprays, so our water and frost to that ice, so we can add arcane or life in those sprays, just to add a bit more oomph. If we're going to add something like arcane, to the ice wall. It won't do too much until the ice wall degrades, and when it degrades it kind of explodes a little bit, and that arcane will do a bit of damage. But I highly recommend adding sprays to either rock or ice walls, as anyone that touches the wall will get affected by that debuff by the spray. So obviously frost will cool them down and make them cold, and water will get them wet. So that's something kind of fun to do, and just leave behind you if you're trying to run away from things. Now, electricity with shield is arguably one of the more powerful spells that you can use in this game, and I really like it. Discovered it just a little while ago with the main exort when we were playing, so very useful spell there. It'll basically create an electricity curtain either in front of you with a normal click, or all around you if you're AoE, use it in an AoE manner. The electricity can be combined with your fire and your frost to again give that debuff. Fire tends to do a bit more damage, frost tends to slow them down, a bit more defensive. And if we're going to use it, we may as well chuck in some arcane to do even more damage. Arcane actually makes the electricity curtain look really cool because it adds a little black streak in the center of all the electricity, so check that out. It looks really nice. So I really like these spells. I tend to use the fire, electricity, arcane curtain for offense, and the frost for defense if I'm trying to shoot beams through it. And that's the advantage of the electricity curtains. They do a lot of damage and they can protect you, but you can still shoot projectiles and beams through the curtain, opposed to rock and ice where you can't do that. They're physical barriers. Which brings us to rock. Rock is the final thing we can use when we're using a shield primary. Our secondary would be rock. We can use all of our sprays again. Rock just produces essentially a rock barrier in front of you, all around you, or if you self-cast, I really like self-casting rock. Gives you a bit of physical protection there. When you're using the elements on a rock, standard cast, so just casting it in front of you, anything that runs into the rock obviously can't walk through it because it's a physical barrier, but they'll also either get set on fire, frosted, or wetted. And we can use steam there as well, similar thing. We can add arcane or life to our rock. Again, that doesn't tend to do much more damage when they're running into it, but the rock does degrade, and when it degrades it'll explode a little bit if you add some arcane or life there. And we can add sprays onto that as well. The last, I guess, tier we can go to is our ice. So we're using shield, rock, and ice. Now this essentially adds like this kind of, you have your rock barrier and they have these ice shards sticking off it, so it does more damage. It does explode, so kind of fun to use. We can add our sprays to that, so water or frost sprays, obviously not fire. Again, it will add those wetted or frosted debuffs to anything that walks into the wall. And we can add arcane or life to do a bit more damage when they explode. Now, we can't add sprays to this arcane or life because unfortunately we've already filled up our spell bar, so you can only cast a maximum of 5 elements at once. So if you're casting shield, rock, water, frost for the ice, and arcane, that's 5. We can't add anything more to that spell, so that's why I haven't continued on that tree there. But that's one of the few tree extensions where you can't go any further. Most of the other combinations you can use all of them. So yeah, that's pretty much the entire spell tree, comprehensive. That's all the combinations. So obviously permutations, the way you cast them, so the manner in which you cast them doesn't matter. It doesn't have any effect in Magicka, as long as there is, a water and frost in there somewhere. Even if they're separated by 3 other elements, you'll still get an ice effect. So it doesn't matter which permutation of elements you use. As long as you use these combinations, you'll get these effects. And of course, adding different. So just say I cast an arcane fire beam, using just a single, SF will do considerably less damage than if I hit SF. So I'm doubling up my elements. I'm doing a lot more damage. So, and that's the same for pretty much all of these. Any spell here that isn't using all 5 of the elements, you can add any one of your normally your sprays. You'll add an extra spray of some variety, spray element, but you can add extra arcane too if you want to. I don't know if it's quite as good, depending on the staff though. Maybe you've got a staff that's upping your arcane damage, so you want to add some more of that. Something to keep in mind there, just experimenting with what elements to double up on. Now personally, when I'm casting, I don't like hitting the same element twice. So if I'm going to cast a beam like an arcane fire beam, I go SF rather than SSFF. I just think it's much more free flowing to cast. So having mentioned that, I think I'll probably go through probably my favourite spells that you'll see me using in any future tutorials that we do or run or walkthroughs. First of all, I really like the beam, the arcane beam, or the life beam. If I'm trying to heal an ally, you can use your life beam to great effect, and if your enemy's on fire, you can use a water life beam to put them out and heal them at the same time. So that's something that you should definitely keep in mind if you're trying to play a bit of a support role. And the fire beam just does a lot of damage to anything coming at you. Same with the frost, but normally fire. Normally fire is what I use. My second spell that I tend to use is an ice burst. Now just ice. I tend to just use ice, and the reason for that is you can hit QR and right click, and you'll just spam that. So you're basically just hitting QR, right click as fast as you possibly can, and you walk right up to something right in the face, and you do a lot of damage because those ice shards, without charging, they don't go very far, and they spray out quite a lot, but you are shooting a lot of them, so you can do a lot of damage really, really quickly with that spray, just spamming it. So I really like that. The third one that I tend to use, not as much, it's very much a defensive spell, is QER. So QER is very easy to hit. You can hit all those keys all at the same time and click right click, and I tend to use this, so it's obviously that is an ice barrier that I'm putting up with the right click, and I tend to use this if I'm getting attacked by like Shams or something that are shooting beams at me. So it's a very quick very quick cast, so it can be a bit of a panic cast if you're getting beams shot at you, so very, very handy to use. And really good if someone's trying to keem kill you or something. You can stop them doing that. Alternatively, you can just hit E and cast it, but that will reflect the beam in a more, I guess, predictable pattern rather than the ice, which is a bit more unpredictable and provides a physical barrier as well. Yeah, personal preference there. Now, when I'm self-casting, it's always good to be running around with a shield on you. Now, the shields that I tend to use are DFDFE, which is a fire shield, or QDQDE, which is a water shield. So, obviously, I tend to use fire because I tend to use a lot of fire spells. So, if I'm using fire spells, I want to use a fire shield as well. Or if it's a bit of a watery level, then I'll put on a QDQDE shield so that I don't get wet. Now, this is the only spells which I actually recommend using 2 of each of those elements. So you probably don't need 2 rock, gives you a bit more physical protection, but other than that, doesn't do much. But the way that the shield mechanics work in this game, you do need 2 to stop you getting those buffs. So if I only use one fire, in my shield, then I'll still be able to catch on fire, which is a bit silly. I'll probably go into a bit more about the shielding mechanics and how to use different spells more effectively later on. But yeah, for now, I highly recommend using those DF, DFE, and QD, QDE as self-cast shields. Now, one of the, I guess, probably slightly less used when I am using it, but I do use it, is the ED, I have to read it now, EDQRS, or if you're going to cast it quickly and more flowingly, is SEDQR, and shift left mouse button. So shift left mouse button does a melee attack. In this case, it will actually plant that spell on your sword. So what that spell does, when you then shift left click again, it'll chuck out this kind of like exploding barrier in front of you that kind of like goes flying out and then explodes backwards. So it'll push things aside a little bit. I tend to have it on my weapon mainly because of things like minotaurs or something charging. If they're going to try and charge you, you can chuck that down between the 2 of you, and as you hit that, it'll stop them, and then it will explode and do some damage to them. So I kind of like that on my weapon. I don't tend to use my weapon too much, not like in Magicka 1, where one of the more powerful spells in the game was probably a weapon cast spell to use it most effectively. But definitely something fun to use and have something fun to. It's just a bit of a panic, like, oh, something's happening. Shift left click, and it's very, very quick. You don't have to cast anything specific. Oh, excuse me there. Now, our second last and probably most offensive and effective spell that we can use is the lightning curtains. So as I mentioned previously, the lightning curtains are really, really good. They do a whole bunch of damage really, really quickly to allies and enemies alike. So that's they're quite nice and easy to cast too. So you got ASER for a frost curtain, or ASEF for a fire curtain. Now I tend to use a fire curtain for offensive, in offensive purposes, so it does a little bit more damage, sets them on fire. So you can cast that down and run away, or you can cast it on your weapon and cast it in front of you. Does tons of damage. That's really, really good. And the ASER, the Frost Curtain, it's a bit more defensive. It'll slow things down. So if you're going to try and use a beam spell to take out a nasty enemy, like a big nasty enemy, maybe chuck down an ASER AOE, so it'll cast the Frost Curtain all around you, and basically it'll kill 90% of the small small enemies that come at you, just off the bat. Just kill them as they try and walk through the curtain, and the ones that it doesn't, it'll actually freeze them so they're moving quite slowly and not doing much to you, so you've got lots of time to react to them. And meanwhile, you're just spamming things out of your curtain, so that's quite a nice way of doing things. Now the final spell that I'll mention is the SDF Shift Middle Mouse Button. Now middle mouse button is obviously AoE, and this is something that you should definitely learn. It's really, really powerful. You hit SDF, you hold down Shift with your pinky, you hit SDF and middle mouse button, and you just keep on doing that over and over and over again, and that'll kill everything. So SDF is obviously the fire. You can use Frost or Water if you want. Fire does a lot more damage, but with that spell combination, just that alone will get you through like 80% of the campaign. You just run into a middle of a bunch of enemies and just spam that. So probably later on, when you're watching myself and my mate Exort do some walkthroughs or playthroughs or things like that, you'll see us using that a lot because it's really, really powerful, and very easy to cast. Very, very easy to cast. Especially when you're using something like a staff that ups your arcane of fire damage. That SDF just does a lot of damage really, really fast and kills absolutely everything. So a lot of fun to use that. So I hope that's been a little bit interesting. We've gone through all of the different elements, all the different combinations, some of the permutations, and my personal favourite spells in Magicka 2. So if you haven't got this game, I highly recommend getting it. It's a lot of fun, and if you do, I hope this has been interesting. I haven't found anything else on the internet that's quite gone through it in this much detail. And if anyone has any links to like damage matrices, so what elements do what, add what damage to your spells, I'd really like to have that link and to be able to update this with damage as well, so we can have a look at which spells do the most damage. So if you have that, do link me up. That'd be really, really cool. And yet, I highly recommend getting into Magicka 2 or Magicka 1 if you haven't played that either. It's a lot of fun and very, very similar mechanics. Hope that's been enlightening. I am Mootle, and until next time, this has been Small Game Adventures, and I hope you enjoyed it.